If you've spent enough time trying to improve at FPS games, you've probably noticed that the way you think about aiming completely changes over time. The player you become at higher levels is not just a mechanically better version of your beginner self, and that's also why some players improve non-stop for years while others get permanently trapped despite grinding thousands of hours. They reach a certain level of mechanics, assume they've learned what aiming is, then spend the next 2 years polishing the wrong layer of the skill. I'll walk you through the 5 levels almost every serious FPS player goes through as they improve their aim, what changes at each stage, and why the final levels barely resemble the way beginners think about aiming. For context, I'm currently top 200 in the finals, and I've helped my team reach second place across all USA colleges in Valorant. I've also won against full-time pro players in leaderboard stacks more than 700 times across 5 FPS titles. What I'll be sharing with you isn't just theory. It's the principles that allow me to compete at the highest level without having inhuman aim. The first level of aim is mechanical survival, and aiming feels chaotic here. You know the shot you want to hit, but your hand simply cannot execute consistently yet. Your crosshair overshoots targets, your tracking feels shaky, and every gunfight feels slightly out of control. At this level, you don't really trust your mechanics because they simply haven't become reliable enough to trust yet. This is also the stage where improvement feels the fastest. You lower your sensitivity to the game you're playing and instantly improve. You deliberately practice for a week and suddenly your shots feel cleaner. Especially when you discover aim trainers, you'll immediately start seeing gains because almost any focused repetition works when your baseline mechanics are still underdeveloped. Most players at this stage believe aiming is almost entirely physical. In their mind, better aim simply means better mouse control. And honestly, early on, they're mostly correct. At this stage, your mechanics genuinely are the biggest bottleneck. But eventually, you hit level 2. Level 2 is mechanical confidence. This is where aiming starts becoming intentional instead of accidental. Your shots stop feeling random. You stop hoping your flicks land and start expecting it to land. Your mechanics become stable enough that you finally gain confidence taking difficult fights, because your hand can usually execute what your brain wants. This is the stage where players often become obsessed with aim improvement because the rewards are extremely visible. You start hitting clips more often, your rank performance rises, friends notice your mechanics improving, and finally you begin identifying yourself as a player with good aim. And this is also where a massive number of players get trapped permanently, because level 2 creates a very convincing illusion. Since isolated mechanical practice improved your aim so much initially, you subconsciously assume every future plateau must also be solved through more mechanics. So every missed shot becomes a flicking problem, and every lost duel becomes a tracking problem. You start chasing cleaner Kovac scores, harder scenarios, faster reactions, and smoother tracking. But eventually, something strange happens. Your aim trainer numbers keep improving while your in-game performance barely changes. That confusion leads you into level 3. Level 3 is perception. This is the point where you realize aiming is heavily affected by what happens before the mouse movement itself. You begin noticing that some fights feel mechanically easy while others feel impossible, and the difference usually has less to do with your hand than you originally thought. You realize your crosshair placement changes the amount of adjustment required. Your anticipation changes how quickly targets appear readable, and your timing changes how much pressure your mechanics operate under. Suddenly, aiming starts feeling connected to awareness, prediction, and preparation. This is also the stage where experienced players stop looking superhuman and start looking more efficient. You realize high-level players are not always making impossible flicks. A lot of the time, they're simply arriving earlier than everybody else mentally. Their crosshair is already near the correct spot before the fight begins. Their eyes recognize movement patterns faster. Their positioning reduces the amount of correction needed. At lower levels, aiming feels reactive. At this level, it starts becoming more proactive. Your gameplay also becomes calmer here since your mechanics are no longer constantly operating on their panic mode. Then eventually, you reach level 4. Level 4 is movement integration. This is where you finally understand that movement and aim are not separate skills. Beginners think movement exists to avoid bullets, while aim exists to hit bullets. But higher levels players realize movement directly shapes aiming difficulty itself. Your strafes affect tracking stability. Your positioning affects flick distance. Your peaks determine how predictable enemy positions feel. At this stage, your movement finally starts actively helping your aim instead of competing against it. You finally stop taking awkward fights that force massive corrections. You stop swinging angles carelessly. You begin synchronizing your crosshair placement with your movement timing. Your mechanics become more consistent not because your raw precision suddenly exploded, but because you're creating cleaner engagements in the game. This is also where many players suddenly understand why some mechanically gifted aim trainer mains still struggle competitively. Raw mechanics alone cannot stabilize bad positioning, poor timing, chaotic movement, or weak anticipation forever. At some point, combat becomes a systems problem instead of an isolated mouse control problem. The interesting thing is that this level often feels less flashy externally, even though it's dramatically stronger competitively. Your gameplay becomes more controlled and efficient. Instead of chasing highlight clips constantly, you begin dominating engagements through consistency. Level 4 is usually when players hit the top rank in the game that they play. After years of practice and improvement, they have finally reached their goal. There's nothing else to gain, so why would they continue to push themselves? Only a tiny fraction of FPS players are dedicated enough to reach the last stage. Level 5 is prediction squared. This is the level most people mistake for God-given talent. When you watch really high-level players, it sometimes looks like they're reacting impossibly fast or landing impossible shots effortlessly. But what's actually happening most of the time is that they're predicting the fight correctly before it unfolds. Their understanding of positioning, timing, movement habits, map flow, and player behavior becomes so advanced that they start reducing uncertainty before the duel even happens. Their crosshair placement is not just predicting the first enemy that appears on their screen, but it's also ready to flick instantly to the second and the third enemy as well. Their movement manipulates enemy expectations as much as it helps them aim, and their positioning funnels opponents into choke points. At this level, aim barely feels like aiming anymore. It feels more like controlling probabilities. And this is why top players can easily transfer between FPS titles faster than expected. Even when the recoil patterns, movement, and mechanics change completely, the underlying skills that drive high-level performance remain the same. Their understanding of timing, positioning, and combat flow still carries over, which lets them adapt far faster than players relying mostly on raw muscle memory. Ironically, this is also where raw aim training becomes valuable again. But now, your relationship with it changes completely. Earlier on, mechanics training felt like the entire game. At higher levels, it becomes a support structure. You still train precision, you still refine mechanics, but now you understand those mechanics are feeding into a much larger combat system rather than existing independently. The important thing to understand is that every level still matters. You cannot skip mechanics entirely and jump straight into prediction. The higher levels are built on top of the lower ones. But the players who improve the fastest long term are usually the ones who realize that aim evolves over time as a result of multiple skills stacking on top of each other. At first, aiming is just trying to control your hand. Then it becomes controlling your mechanics. Then it becomes controlling your perception. Then your movement. And eventually, it becomes controlling the fight itself before it even happens. Currently, 95% of my viewers don't bother subbing to the channel, and every sub really means a lot for a channel of my size. Thanks a lot for considering.